guys, it's Crystal with Peer, and we've already talked about Bridge and how powerful of a program that is to work in conjunction with Photoshop. And so the next thing I want to talk about is Adobe Camera Raw, or ACR. It's included with Photoshop, and that is where you edit your raw images before you take them into Photoshop. And so to open open Adobe Camera Raw, you double click an image that ends in a raw file, and then it will open into Adobe Camera Raw. And it will give you the information of which camera is shot. It gives you your color space right here. And this is something important to pay attention to. I always try to make sure that this is an sRGB. And so if it's not, if it's in RGB or any of these other Adobe RGB or any of these other profiles here, I always make sure that it's an sRGB, and it's also in 8-bit. And then you can just click that if you need to change that. And so I'm just going to kind of go over some of the tools inside of ACR. Very rarely do I need to open a photo into Photoshop, because I do as much as I can inside of ACR. And so I'm just going to kind of walk through these a little bit. This little dropper tool right here is your white balance tool. Super helpful, especially when it comes to wedding dresses and getting a proper white balance. You just find something neutral that's supposed to be white and you click it and it'll change the white balance. Do you see what it just did there? It added a little bit more magenta. And if I click in the wrong spot, it'll change the photo to be super blue or green or something that I'm not wanting. But do you see what it just did there? It looks so much better. Just that right there, it changed it took it out of the little bit of green hint that was into the photo, and it looks much more lifelike. Her skin looks red and the proper color. That's a super useful tool. Here you have your targeted adjustment tool. We'll get into that. Here you have your crop tool and your straighten tool, which is super handy when it comes to when you're doing group shots with lines like stairs. That comes in super handy. This is your spot removal tool. I don't use that very much in here. If I do need to do some spot removal, that's a reason why I will bring it into Photoshop. I feel like Photoshop is a lot more refined than this tool right here. You have your red eye tool, your adjustment brush tool, and I use this one a lot. And then your radial filter tool or your graduated filter. The radial filter tool I use a lot. I super love that tool. So over here you have your basic edits. You have your saturation, vibrance, exposure, contrast, highlights, and so on, and your white balance. You can change your white balance right here, or custom is as shot. Well, it's custom now. As shot, this is what it looked like when I shot it. And then if I changed it back to custom, that's what it was when I clicked the white balance tool. So here you have like a tone curve, and you can mess with the highlights and darks and affect the tone curve there, or you can come over to your point and actually use it almost like Photoshop's curve tool. So I'll go ahead and get rid of that point and make this 0 again. You have your sharpening tool here, and I'll get more into detail about that, but this comes in super handy. I love to add sharpening and then also masking it. So if you come over to your masking tool here and hold down your option button, it'll show you the white is where it is applying the sharpening. So right now it's applying it to everything. And as you drag this over, it becomes more refined in where it's sharpening. So it's just sharpening the edges. And I super love that. This is your noise reduction. If you had to shoot at a high ISO, you can move that over. This is your HSL, so you got your hue, saturation, and your luminance. This is also where you can convert the photo into a black and white and then adjust these numbers to make your photo look how you want it to look. Now, I will say that when you open this into Photoshop, it does limit your options because it is in grayscale mode. So you'll have to change that, and we can talk over that in a little bit. This is your split toning. Oh, let me turn the black and white off. This is your split toning. I don't use it a lot, but it does come in handy if you want to target just your highlights or your shadows and add specific coloring to those. So if I wanted to maybe warm up her highlights, I could change the hue over to the yellow orangish, and then you can raise your saturation up. And so I'll show you, if I raise it up really high, you can see what it's doing. But I could just raise it up just a little bit, and it just adds a little bit of extra warmth to her skin. So that's an option to warm things up also. Here you have your lens corrections. I don't hardly use this at all. I cannot remember the last time that I used this. And here you have your effects. This is where I do any vignetting that I want to do to the photo. If you go plus, you get that. If you go negative, you get like the black vignette. And I try to keep it between 15 and 20, so it's more natural. Lately, I've been on a kick where I just don't use it at all. I like the way it looks. The photo looks brighter without it. Here you have your camera calibration. I don't really mess with these much at all either. And then you have your presets. And I have a preset already in here, and I'm going to show you how to install presets, how to create presets, save presets, and so on. And so this is your tool, right? These are your tools right here. Down here you have your before and after and how you view your photo. So if I raise the exposure, let me just do a quick edit. If I use this radio filter and I drag it out right here, and I wanted to just kind of warm her up in the center, you'll see that I'm only adding some warmth, and inside it's selected inside. So you can see if I brighten the exposure, it's only applying it inside of that circle. And just like your Photoshop brushes, you want to make sure that there's some feathering, because if you don't, it'll be a circle and there will be very obvious lines. And then I'm going to go ahead and click new. And then I'm going to come and do another one. And I'm actually going to put this on the outside. And I'm going to get rid of the temperature. I'm going to lower my exposure. And so you can drag this around anywhere you want. And you can adjust the size. You can also rotate it like this. And I feel like that looks really good. I like the way that looks. Then I can come in, this is my crop tool, and I can crop my image. And if I crop it and then I right click, I can choose the ratio. If I want it to be a square, or if I want it to be 2x3, which is also 4x6. So, and then I can rotate that back. And it's nice because the crop tool has built in the rule, like almost the rule of thirds. And so I'll just kind of stick with that. I think I like the, oh, I need to bring this over. There we go. Okay, so I kind of like the way that looks. So then you just hit enter. And actually, it looks like I need to rotate it. Okay, so now it's straight. And so now I can continue my edit. If you hit enter twice, you will accidentally open your image. So make sure you get patient. Sometimes Photoshop takes a little bit and you want to get crazy and hit enter more than once, and you'll end up opening it into Photoshop. So here you can see your before and after. So here was the before and here was the after. And those were just a couple of super quick things that I did to the image, and I loved the way that it looks. And so this can show you side by side, this little button right here. So you can cycle between the way you want it. So this shows you the before on the top and the after on the bottom. Here's just it's showing you just the after, or you can do it side by side like that. However you want, up and down, whatever works best for you. I obviously prefer it this way because I like to see what I'm doing. And so then you have your save image down here in the lower left-hand corner. And so if you click that, you can rename the file, and you can save into a new location or however you see fit. We did talk about this in the bridge aspect where I talked about renaming the file first before saving it. And so what I would do is once I'm done with this edit, I would hit done. If you hit open image, the image will open into Photoshop and then you'll be editing the image inside of Photoshop. But like I mentioned, I try not to bring my images into Photoshop very often. And so I feel like this is a very good, clean edit that I would give to my clients. I feel like it represents my work. If I wanted to get a little bit more artistic, I could use this adjustment brush. So it almost works exactly like the radial filter, except for it's a brush and you just brush on what you want to have done. And so if I say I want to lower the exposure just a little bit, and I can just brush this on. If I wanted it to be just a little bit more dramatic. And then the bracket keys, just like inside of Photoshop, lower, and make the brush smaller or bigger. And always don't forget the space in between legs. Like I feel like sometimes people forget that space and then that's super bright and the rest of it's super dark. And then it's like, oh, you Photoshopped that. And the goal is to make it look like it could have really looked like this, right? And so then if I do anything to this photo, if I'm like, oh, I actually don't like it that dark, I can raise the exposure and it'll apply it to where it's done. If I want to add something new, so let's say I want to, I'll click new and now it's adding something new. So I can make the bracket bigger and let's say I want to lower the blacks and raise the shadows and add a little bit of contrast. And maybe I'll warm up the rest of the image too. So now I'll just kind of brush this on around her. Now you're going to see something that happens here. You've got these pins on your image. And this comes in super handy. This red pin is the pin that I'm currently working on. It is the one that is adding this warm and this contrast and the highlights and the shadows. This image, this pin right here, if I hover over it, is showing me is showing me the mask. And if I click it, you'll notice these numbers over here changed because now I'm editing this pin. And if I want to delete, like erase some of this pin, so once I click this mask button right here, if I see that, oh, it's actually on her dress a little bit, I can come over here to the erase button and make my brush a little bit bigger. And I can erase and I can see the mask go away. And so that's showing me that once I unclick this mask, that I think I was lowering the exposure is not going to be happening on her dress anymore. So maybe I'll take care of that right there, right here. And now if I unclick the mask, that's what it looks like. And so I just clean that up a little bit. So again, I can hover over here and I can see, oh, I kind of got it on there. So if I show the mask and I click erase, I can get it off of her dress here. And you can toggle between the masks. Super easy. And now if I unclick that, this is what it looks like. So let's say I'm like, oh, I don't want that at all. Or maybe I don't want this one. I can click that, make sure it's red so it's activated, and then hit the delete button and it gets rid of it. The same with this. I can select that one, hit the delete button, and it gets rid of that. But I can also show you what it looked like right here. So I want to show this before and after. That's what it looked like, and that's what we have. So do you see when I mentioned that I don't have to bring things into Photoshop? Because I feel like that is 100% a representation of my work. And it is because that's what I put out and I produce and I advertise. I would probably bring this into Photoshop and clean this up, this little area right here up a little bit. Her dress is kind of bunching, and so I'd probably use the liquify tool and just bring that in a little bit. She's super tiny, so even if it makes her look tinier, that she was super tiny. So I don't feel like I'm doing anything that's not true to who she is. And again, I can use the adjustment brush if I wanted to and add a little bit of pop to the flowers. So make sure it says new. And then if I click this plus sign here, it gets rid of everything else. It zeroes everything else out except for the one that I clicked the plus sign on. So if I click the exposure, it got rid of the contrast and brought up the exposure. So let me go ahead and just click the contrast, and I'm going to actually add a little bit of saturation, and I'm going to lower the exposure just a little bit, and I'm just going to come in here to her flowers and just add a little bit of oomph. And so it really was not a lot. And if you want to look at the photo without the pins, you can just click on the hand and it gets rid of the pins and you can see what your photo looks like. Okay, so now that we have walked through some of the basics of Adobe Camera Raw, I'm going to go ahead and show you a few tools to help speed up your workflow even more. And once you learn how to harness these tools, you will be amazed at how fast you can edit. We can get a session out usually the day that we shoot if we sat down and did it. And a wedding, if we sat down uninterrupted, we could edit and cull in about 3.5 to 4 hours. But sadly, with 13 kids between us, it's pretty impossible to do that. But I'm going to go ahead and show you some tools to help speed up your workflow in case you don't have 13 kids. So when you're done editing this image, I'm going to go ahead and hit done. If I hit cancel, it'll cancel the edit. If I hit open image, it will open it into Photoshop. So I'm going to go ahead and hit done so then I can get back to Bridge. And so there's a couple of different ways to speed up your workflow. If you've edited one image, you can right click and you can hit develop settings, copy settings. And now you can select this image and select however many images are in the same type of sequence, the same lighting, the same color tonality, the same brightness, exposure, that type of situation. You don't want to go into any images up here and apply the same edit because it's not the same type of situation, so you don't really know how it would look. So right here though, these images were taken right before this image, so everything is exactly the same. So I will choose one and I'll just do 4, for example. I'll hold down the shift key and choose the last one and it will automatically select all 4. I've already selected, right clicked, develop, copy settings. So I'll choose this one, right click, develop settings, paste settings, and a box will pop up. And so it just by default selects these. Now remember, when we edited this image, we also applied radial filters to get the darker background around her, and we used one to lighten her up and warm her up, and that is called a local adjustment. And so you want to make sure it's going to by default not choose that, but if you have things in the same area, I would go ahead and choose local adjustments and hit OK. And so now you can see that it's editing these images for me, and I love the way it looks. And the nice thing about this is that it gives consistency. So I have this image and this one and this one and this one, and they're all consistent with my style. Now, if I wanted the crop to be the same, I could right click, copy settings, do the same thing, right click, paste settings, and then also choose crop. And so it's going to apply the same crop to those images. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Obviously, every image is different, but it looks great. The crop works for those images. The other way to do this is to open more than one image at a time. And so I'll go ahead and open these ones. And I'll go ahead, so I just choose one, shift and open, and select the last one. And then I'm going to hit enter, and it will open all of these images. So let's say I edit this image the way I want. I won't select all of them. I'll just have all these images open and I'll edit this one. So then I can hold down the shift key, select the last one, right click and hit sync settings. Same box will pop up. I will choose local adjustments and crop, and I'll hit OK. And so you can see that this image looks perfect. It looks exactly like this one. This image is a little crazy because it's applying, once you click this radial filter, you'll see where these circles are. And so it's not a perfect science, especially when you are going from a horizontal to a vertical or vertical to a horizontal. But the nice thing about it is you can select that radial filter and just move it to where you want it to be. And you can change the size. And so while it might not be perfect, it applied the same settings. And so now you just have to move and adjust that radial filter. So I'll go ahead and select this one and move this over. And this is the one that's lowering the exposure around her. So I'll go ahead and raise this up because I want her face. And I don't even know if I would actually edit this image just because her face is cropped off. I may actually make it more of like an artistic edit. And here's the crop. It was applying the same type of crop from here, so it doesn't really work out. But I could crop this in like so and then hit enter. And actually I don't really mind that at all. And so now I can come in with my adjustment brush, and again, because I use that adjustment brush, it's a random spot. It needs to go over on the flowers like it was before. And now I actually feel like this spot right here is a little too bright for me, so I can click new. And I can go ahead and get rid of the contrast and lower the exposure and obviously lower the saturation. And I'll use my bracket keys next to the letter P to make this bigger. And I'll just go ahead and lower this exposure right here because I feel like it was kind of like an oddball, like bright spot. And actually I'll go ahead and warm it up a little bit because I feel like compared to the other images it's not as warm. So then I'll click new, and I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this warming. And now that I've darkened the areas around it, I need to darken this area right here to match. And I feel like that's much more consistent with the other images. If we can get that to come up. So I feel like that is consistent. It matches the other images. So now I can go ahead and hit done, and it's edited those images for me. And so if I come up here, I'll just choose one, hold down the shift key, and choose the last one that I want to edit. Hit enter, and it will open up all these images into Camera Raw for me. And so she's standing in the same place, and I am shooting basically the same focal length and from the same place. So once I crop this image, I can probably apply the crop across the board. So I like that crop. And so I'll go ahead and use the white balance tool and try to warm her up a little bit. And I feel like that actually is a perfect white balance right there. May add just a little bit more magenta. And then I'm going to come in with my radial filter. This is probably one of my favorite tools. And I'll go outside. And do you see just how much that just changed the look of the image right there? It just adds so much. Okay, and then I will just bring that in just a little bit. And I can actually lower the exposure probably just a little bit more. And if I raise the shadows and then lower the blacks a little bit, it adds that little punch that I'm looking for. And the clarity, I like to sometimes lower my clarity to like -10 to -15 or so. And it just softens it a little bit, especially if I'm not doing it on her. She kind of pops. She becomes that center focal point. And so here's what the image looked like before. And I think that's a really nice, clean edit. And it seriously took like a minute. And now the nice thing is I can come down here. This is already selected, this top image. Hold down my shift key, select the last one, right click, sync settings, and I will make sure to choose local adjustments and crops and hit OK. And look at what it did. It edited all of these images for me. And we're done. And then I can hit done, and it'll open it back up into Bridge. And you can see it start applying these edits to these images. Now, I already talked in the Bridge portion, how to cull, and how I use the rating system and everything like that. So I would follow that system still. I would lower the rating to a 1, it would disappear, and then I would continue editing along my way. So if I come up here, these ones are bright images. I like these. So it would make no sense to apply the same type of edit there because I don't want to darken the whites. I want it to be a light and bright image because that's what's going on here. And so I like this. And so there's just a little bit of, it's a little too bright. So if I lower my highlights and my whites, and then I'll come in with my adjustment brush and I'll hit the plus sign to even everything out. And then I'll just lower the exposure on this and just bring this in on the flowers. And I can also lower my whites and my highlights. Not too much though, because it'll get muddy. And so I feel like that is a good stepping stone. So you can see just right there what that did. And then let me get back to my original image. And then I can adjust the white balance a little bit. It seemed to be just a little off. And I can click around to different white spots in her dress until I find one that I like. And if I can't find one, then I can just raise the warmness myself. I feel like it's got enough magenta in it that I just need to raise the warmth. And then I'll go ahead and lower my blacks a little bit to add a little bit of pop there. And maybe up my contrast just a smidge. And now I'll go ahead and, that's already selected, I will hold down the shift key, select the top one, right click sync settings, and I'll go ahead and say okay. Now I did not sync the adjustment brush or the radial filter, so I'll do that again. Sync settings, local adjustments, and hit OK. And now I'm going to need to come in and fix that because I actually use the adjustment brush. So because you can see if I turn on the mask, it's up here some. So I need to go ahead and move this. Turn that off. Go ahead and move it. Let's see. I think right there. Let's see where this mask is. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and just erase some of this mask because it's ending up on her arm, and I'm not a fan of that. Perfect. Then I can turn this mask off, and that's perfect. I feel like that's light and bright, and if I really wanted to, I could add a new one and press the plus sign. This will actually probably be perfect. And I want to raise the exposure on her arms here. They're falling into the shadow here a little bit, and it's kind of taken away from the light and bright feeling that I'm wanting right here. And so I feel like that's perfect. And so if I click the before and after, that's what we have right here. And so it just adds that little bit of oomph. And in fact, actually, now that I'm seeing the before and after, sometimes when you are editing the image, you feel like it looks good. And then once you look at the after and you look at the before, you feel like maybe you did a little bit too much. So I select this pin. I'm going to go ahead and hit erase. And this flower right here in particular was a little too dark for me. And so I'll just go ahead and hit that now. And I feel like that's much better. And so I can go ahead and shift sync settings with this one, local adjustments, and hit OK. And that's going to be much better because that is more in line, these two images, than with these two. So now I can just come over here and I can hit add and just add a little bit there. And I feel like that's a little too dark, so I'll just go ahead and raise the exposure there a little bit. And I feel like that's good. I fixed up her skin a little bit and added a little bit of pop to the flowers. So once I'm done with those, I just hit done like I was talking about before. So now let's say you've completely edited this session and you want to save the images. So I'll go ahead and select all the images that I've edited, and then I'll go ahead and hit enter. And actually, as we talked about in the other video for Bridge, I'll have already renamed these files. So they'll already have been batched renamed. But if you forget to do that and you open the images, you can also do that after the fact. So I'll select them all and hit Save Images. And here you can rename them essentially the same way that you did with the batch rename. I tend to do it beforehand just because it's the workflow that I've gotten into. However, you can choose to do it whichever way you want. So I will go ahead and just name this Bridal Bride. And then I'll always change it to 001, and you can select the folder in which you want to go. You can choose to include all the metadata or just the copyright or just the copyright and contact info, your quality size, your color space. Always make sure that it's an sRGB and 8-bit. And you can output sharpen. I've never done that. I feel like I don't really have as much control over that. So I will sharpen in Camera Raw before I do that. So, and then you just hit save and it will save those images. So I'll go ahead and hit cancel on this. So now the next thing I want to talk about are presets. So let's say you edit this way consistently and you find yourself editing like this. Let's say I haven't done much here. I did most of it with this radial filter. But let's say I raise the contrast and pull the highlights down and pull the whites down and maybe raise the shadows and pull the blacks and the clarity down, the vibrance up. Okay, so let's say that this is a way that I edit consistently and I already have my sharpening in here, and let's say maybe I change the feel of the greens. So if I change the hue here, I could go a little bit like this, and if I change the yellows, I could go maybe a little bit like this, and if I do the luminance and raise how bright these are, and actually I'm going to lower the saturation of them a little bit. I feel like that is good. Let me raise the luminance of the orange. The orange tends to be skin tone along with the reds. So I'll go ahead and just lower these a little bit more. And maybe I won't do the hue as much, right? And then maybe I'll add a little bit of pop here with the shadows, or however I want to do that. Maybe raise the shadows so it's not as contrasty. The darks right here. Okay, so here's this image. So this is what we started with, and this is what we ended up with here. This is actually the edit originally. The original photo looked completely different, but let's say this is what we have here, right? Okay, so let me go back. So let's say that you consistently edit like this. So you want to save the preset. So you come over here, it looks like these three little lines here, and it's going to be empty if you haven't done this before. You're going to right click on this right here, and you're going to click Save Settings. And so you're going to go ahead and this box is going to pop up. Now, I would not recommend saving white balance, and sometimes I wouldn't recommend saving exposure. White balance definitely, because that will make this action less universal, because it's going to save the specific white balance for this image. And so if you have an image in a different light source, it's going to apply this white balance, and so you're going to have to go in and fix it. And so if you unclick white balance, it will leave the white balance as you currently have it in any future image. So if I open another image, it will not change the white balance. And the same with the exposure, because again, every image is different. If I open an image that's perfectly exposed, but on this image, I had to raise the exposure, I don't want to raise the exposure on the other image because it's perfectly exposed. So that saves you a little bit of time. If you don't click exposure and you have an image that maybe needs a little bit of boost, you can do that after the fact, but it's better to wait and do that after the fact. So then you're going to go ahead and hit save, and you're going to name your preset. I'm going to name it I'm going to name it test preset for video. Okay, so I'll go ahead and hit save, and you just save it somewhere. It doesn't matter as long as you remember where you saved it, because it's not going to show up here yet. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit done, and then I'm going to need to install that preset. I have this preset right here, test preset for video, and I'm just going to Command C to copy that, and then I'm going to come up to I'm going to create a new Finder, and I'm going to go up to the Go, and I'm going to hit Option and choose the Hidden Library. And then I'm going to go to Application Support, Adobe, Camera Raw, Settings, and Control V to paste it. Okay, so now I can close out of that, and I can come back to this image, and I can open this image up. And now I can come back to my presets, and it's going to be here. There we go. So now I can just select it, and it'll apply that edit. And then I can hit done. So the next and final tip and trick I want to give to you about ACR is the dehaze option. It is such a lifesaver. When we shot this wedding, it was an elopement at the courthouse, and it was literally at noon, I think, when they came out. Maybe 2. Actually, I think it was noon when they started. We were a little bit delayed, so it was about 2 o'clock when they came out. And it was so bright. It was in the middle of the summer. It was hot and hazy, and this image reflects just how hazy it actually was. And so this dehaze filter option is amazing. So it's just under the FX, and as you move it to the right, you'll notice that it starts getting rid of the haze. Now you have to be careful, because watch her hand and the skin tone and the color of the skin. So it gets a little wonky and a little orange, and so you definitely want to be careful. And so what I will do on top of this is I will come and first I'm going to run this test preset for video. And I actually like the coloring that it gives. Now it did get rid of the dehaze because I did not have that saved in that preset. So I can go ahead and add that back. Now look at her skin, it's kind of turning orange. So I'll just come over here to my HSL and I will desaturate. You have to be careful so you don't end up with gray, but I will desaturate the oranges and the reds, and I feel like that's a lot better. And then I'll come to my adjustment brush, and I can choose, I'll get rid of the saturation, and I can choose the dehaze also here. And so you don't want to get too crazy. This is actually pretty heavy-handed, this option right here, so you don't want to do too much at once. And so I'll just kind of come in here and brush. The nice thing is it gives you just a little bit more oomph than just the dehaze slider. So I'm going to kind of come right here, and I feel like that's a lot better. I'm going to go ahead and hit new, and then I'm going to come and target this little area, because you can see where the sun was kind of giving a different tone to his jacket. And again, if my clients purchased this image or wanted it in their album, I could come in and clean that up with the spot healing brush tool or the clone tool inside of Photoshop. So now I'm going to go ahead and hit new, and I'm going to go ahead and, where's my saturation, and hit the minus button, and I'm going to raise it just a little bit because I just want to take care of her hand right here. It's just a little strong, and her neck area. And again, you want to be careful because you don't want to end up with gray skin. And so I'll go ahead and hit new, and then lower this even more to maybe like -10, and then come in and do his face right there. And I will come in and do her dress and just get rid of that a little bit. So then I can also come in and target the saturation. I can target the yellows a little bit more. But again, I don't want to lose any coloring to the greens. And so if I keep lowering the saturation even more, it's going to take away the coloring of the background. So I think that that's good. And here's the before and after. So seriously, check out the dehaze tool inside of Camera Raw. It's right here under FX, and it is seriously amazing. And this is also where I add my post-crop vignette, and just a little bit of pop would be nice right there. And I love the way that that looks. This is an image that I would be proud to give my clients once I fixed up this little area right here. And we will get into that in another video on how to do that. So that's the last tip and trick that I have for Camera Raw. It is such a powerful program, and once you take time to learn the program and practice, your workflow will speed up dramatically, and you'll be surprised at how fast and efficient you really are. So if you have any questions, let us know.